Gryphons Read is the University of Guelph's annual common reading program. This year, Gryphons Read is reading Home of the Floating Lily, a collection of short stories by Silmy Abdullah, who will be on campus September 26th, 27th, 28th to talk about her work. My name is Aimee Copping. I'm a graduate student in critical studies and improvisation, and I recently Zoomed with the author to find out more about Home of the Floating Lily. I'm speaking with Silmy Abdullah, author of Home of the Floating Lily and the subject of this year's Gryphons Read program. So I'm a very sociable and outgoing individual, Silmy. So instead of being very somber and formal, I'm going to start with the same three questions that I ask when I meet people for the first time in social settings. What do you read? Which authors do you love and why?
Oh, what a great question to start with. I love reading a mix of fiction and nonfiction, so I like to switch between the two. Sometimes I find that nonfiction is becoming too much for me, and so I switch to fiction. And then if I get bored with a certain novel or short story collection, I'll go back to nonfiction. So, literary fiction is my favorite. So I love writers like Rohinton Mistry, Elif Shafak, Khalid Hosseini, Jhumpa Lahiri. I would say Jhumpa Lahiri is probably my absolute favorite, and I draw a lot of inspiration from her. And she also writes about stories of migration, specifically about the Bengali community, although from India, not necessarily from Bangladesh, and who are situated in the United States. So she has been a huge source of inspiration for me with respect to this book in particular. So I love reading her books. With respect to nonfiction, I like to read a different mix of things, like books on spirituality, on history. So yeah, and when it comes to short story writers, I love Chekhov, I love Alice Munro. Again, Jhumpa Lahiri short stories are amazing. So those are some of my few top favorites, I would say.
Strange as this may sound, Home of the Floating Lily reminded me of Bleak House. I don't know if you know this, but before Dickens wrote professionally, he was actually a reporter in the law courts. And Bleak House was in part his attempt to expose the iniquities of the Victorian legal system. Your stories similarly shine a critical light on challenges facing newcomers to Canada, economic inequality, gender-based violence, just to name a few important issues. Has your work as an immigration lawyer inspired you not just to write, but to write about those issues?
I've wanted to write for as long as I can remember, and that has always been my first love, still is, my journey as a writer predates my journey as a lawyer. So I started writing these stories before I became a lawyer. So I wasn't necessarily thinking of them as an expose of, the inequities of our society here with respect to immigration, although that is very much a backdrop, right? And I do explore the relationship between migration and people's family lives and people's relationships with one another. So although that was conscious, but it started more from my own lived experiences and what I observed around me, right? Because this is what I've known since I was a little child. I've been moving, I've been going to different places since I was from a very young age. So I was born in Bangladesh, but then I left my country with my family at the age of 1. My father got a job in Saudi Arabia, so we lived there for 12 years. And then after that, we moved to Canada. So it's been very much a part of my own lived reality. So that was the main source of inspiration for writing these stories. But at the same time, after I became a lawyer, it definitely played a role in refining some of the stories, right, and fine-tuning some of the stories, and further exploring how certain characters may or may not behave in a given situation, right? So once I started practicing as a lawyer, issues around gender-based violence, issues around poverty and how that impacts people as it gets complicated with the experience of migration, all those things became more I guess, more apparent, or I got a better nuanced understanding of those things as I matured as a person and as I started practicing as a lawyer. So then some of those things came, like, seeped into how I crafted the much later drafts of the stories. So that's sort of how it went. Yeah.
Well, the characters in these stories, it seems to me, make a lot of big decisions with a lot of outside help. In one story, the central character studies political science to please her father, and in another, there are two young boys who are constantly reminded, really sort of almost harangued by their mother and her expectations for their academic success, their careers, even their personal relationships. And I'd love to know what it is that drives you to write about people, and specifically their life choices, and how they go about making those choices.
I think what drives me is my curiosity, honestly, and perhaps compassion also, I would say. I've always been very, very curious about, what people are feeling, and, what drives them to make certain choices in life. Why are they making certain choices? What could happen if they went another way versus the way that they chose to go? And that's something that I've done since I was a child. I would observe people, I would observe certain events that happened in their lives and observe their feelings and their reactions. And I thought, I wonder why that happened, or I wonder what made them do that. Or if I met somebody and at a point where they were going through something, or perhaps even I don't even know anything about them, I would wonder, what is their backstory? What brought them here? Things like that. And that also became more pronounced as I started practicing law, and I met people from different walks of life, people with very, very heartbreaking stories, people who didn't have a lot of choice in their lives, which brought them to points in their lives where they were devastated. So I think I'm very interested in that line between complete freedom and duress and force, right? Because if you think about it, how free are we really? Like, I always think about this. I can think of myself as a free individual with my own choices, but when I'm driving on the street, I'm not going to run a red light because there are laws that prevent me from doing that. So every day we're making choices that have outside influences. And so I'm interested in understanding what it is that's driving us to make certain choices, and what are the influences, right? So because there's a line between being forced to do something or doing something under duress and being completely reckless, right? And not thinking about anything outside of you, because we don't really live in a vacuum, right? We're social human beings. We have familial obligations, we have societal obligations, we have issues from our past that make us make certain choices. So I'm interested in that, right? Like, what makes us responsible human beings and compassionate human beings? And that's really what I try to explore in the stories, because if you think about it, in none of the stories do you see that obvious element of somebody being forced to do something, right? It's more like they have obligations, or they have responsibilities, or they're thinking about their parents, or they're thinking about what their children are going to think, or what people outside are going to think. So that's what I'm interested in, and that's what I've tried to explore in the stories.
The book really kind of opens with for me, a very satisfying bang. In a good family, the first two paragraphs are a virtual tour de force and Tolstoyan concision, a huge amount of information about a character named Rubina is packed into, and I'm sure I'm mispronouncing all these names.
No, that's correct.
those 10 sentences. But, and this is one of my favorite devices, the story is actually about someone else. I get the feeling that you really like to surprise your readers.
I do. I do. And I think I try to put myself in the shoes of the reader. So when I read a book or when I read a particular story, I know that if there are elements of surprise and twists and things that I can't predict, that makes for a much more invigorating, much more enriching reading experience, right? So I don't want or I don't like my stories to be predictable because I think that's doing my readers a disservice, right? So and to be honest, this whole idea of putting Rubina's story in the beginning and then switching to Shumi's after the first, this was the creative genius of my editor, actually. So I actually didn't have that. So I give complete credit to her because these two paragraphs are the 10 sentences, the beginning 10 sentences were in the middle somewhere. So I started with Shumi and Rubina was introduced later, and she gave me the idea of why don't you start with this? And I think it was a brilliant idea, and it works really well in my opinion. So because Rubina is a very, very important character in the story, even though it is Shumi's story primarily.
That's right.
But it's Rubina and the connection with Rubina's family, connection between Rubina's family and Shumi's family that really drive the plot and the decisions that the characters are making. So I think putting it at the top, putting it right in the beginning also gives a clue to the readers that this is important and this is going to be something to watch for as you go along.
Your own story is at least as compelling as the stories in the book. You're an immigration lawyer, you're active in your community, and you're an undeniable talent who's managed to blend all these things together in prose. What I want to know is, how and where did it all start? What's the origin story behind the jacket copy?
Well, first of all, thank you very much. I guess, as I was mentioning before, the origin goes way, way back, many, many years ago. I've wanted to write since I was a kid. I wrote my first very cheesy poem at the age of 7. So I knew from that time that I wanted to be a writer. And these stories didn't come to me until I moved to Canada, because I didn't really write seriously until after I finished law school. I started thinking about these stories after I moved here, and I started observing, the realities of other immigrant families around me, my own family who has gone through, more than one occasion of migrating to a different place, a different country. And so it's a topic that's very close to my heart, and it's a topic that I know I can say I'm very familiar with, right? Because I live and breathe it, basically. And so I wanted to bring to the page stories of people that are not being told, or even if they're being told, they're not being heard. So the seeds came shortly after I moved to Canada, but I didn't start writing them until I had the time and the energy to do so, which was after I completed my formal education. And it was kind of a blessing in disguise that I didn't have a full-time job for almost a year after I finished law school. So that was a time when I really sat down and started thinking deeply and seriously about these stories and writing the first drafts. And so, I guess that's how the journey progressed, I guess. And I'm
struck by the pervasive domesticity of these stories. Much time and attention is devoted to what the characters eat or cook or wear, how they wear it, their hair. On the rare occasions that a character is somewhere other than home, they're trying to get home. What is it about home and hearth that gives it such a prominent role in your stories?
I think having a sense of home or having a sense of belonging is the most universal longing that we have as human beings. Everybody wants to belong. Everybody wants to feel at home. And that sense of home could be a place. It could be being with a person. It could be doing something that you love to do. All of those things give you a sense of anchor, right? And we all need that anchor and rootedness. And so that's why I felt that if that became I mean, of course, there's that big, very obvious theme of trying to find home when it comes to people who are migrating between places, right? But at the same time, I'm interested to explore and share with the readers what's happening behind closed doors, what's happening in that physical space of home. What is happening between two people and their relationships and their feelings, what is happening to someone's relationship with themselves. So really zooming in on the inside. And I feel that things like what people are cooking, what people are wearing, what people are doing in their mundane day-to-day lives, that's what really connects us, because that's where we find the universality of the human experience, right? So I'm very interested in exploring the extraordinary moments we have in ordinary, mundane moments in life, or mundane events. And so that's why it I guess that's why it's so prominent in the stories, because I feel that that's, even though it's situated in a very specific community in a specific context, it's the human experience that connects us all. So,
and at the same time, there's an impressive, almost cool quality, a real sense of detachment in the stories, even in Familiar Journey and the title story, in which there's some fairly, heated, dramatic, plotting and real action, with a capital A. There's a lot of restraint. It feels to me like you're encouraging the reader to make up her or his mind about what's actually unfolding. Or is that what's happening? Is that what you're after?
Somewhat. I think more than making up their minds, I'm encouraging readers to be curious and to ask questions as they go along, and to use their imagination. Again, like if you give everything away, and if you just put everything on the platter and tell them, here, this is what it's about, and this is what you should know, and this is what you should feel and think as a reader, then I think it's not a very fulfilling experience for the reader, right? It's like it's the same thing when you're watching a TV show or a movie, right? If you're curious, if there's things that are revealed slowly at different points rather than in the beginning. For example, if you have somebody that died on the show, I think it's much more impactful when you reveal to the readers that, yes, this person has died, and then go back and introduce the character slowly and kind of build that relationship between the character and the viewers. And then they become more curious. Okay, what happened to this person? How did this person die? Right. And so if you look at my story, the title story, which is Home of the Floating Lily, in the beginning that there was a murder that happened. There's tension between the couple, but then slowly it's revealed, what went wrong, what happened, even when it comes to emotions of the characters, right? You don't need, some scenes will require it, right? For example, if there's like a big revelation, for example, in the story, without giving too much away, in the title story, there's a big revelation that happens between the mother and the daughter. So that scene warrants a little bit of drama where the teenage daughter is, reacting and things like that. But you don't need that kind of reaction or those obvious expression of emotions, people screaming and crying in every scene, right? Because then I think it lowers the impact. If you restrain it a little bit, if you make it a little bit more subtle, then it leaves it up to the reader's imagination to kind of think what happened or what may happen or what this character is feeling. To give you another example, Tamina in The Secret Affair, what she goes through is very, very painful, but you don't really see her expressing those emotions, crying or, being very overt about her emotions, but it's the actions, the little things that she does that I hope would make the reader feel her pain. And so I think it just creates a stronger impact on the reader. And also when it comes to the endings, so you gave the example of Home of the Floating Lily and Familiar Journey, but if you look at the story Reflection, there's an ending where the reader knows the reader knows that, yes, this person has made a choice or made a decision, but they don't really know if she's going to stick to that decision. There's so much more that could happen. For example, is she going to go back to her lover, or is it just a temporary thing? Why did the lover not show up? Things like that. So yeah, I like to make it more subtle, and it is a very conscious tool to answer your question. Yeah.
The next question is actually about that story. I was asked to read it as part of my induction into the Gryphons Read family, and immediately captivated by its very dynamic, rapidly paced, almost filmic quality, loud music, camera flashes, the dark comedy of the ceremony with the mirror, the unexpected twist that you just mentioned, and at the center of all of this, the sort of ugly duckling heroine, Muna. And was this intentional, or am I just watching too many movies?
No, I think I mean, yes, it was intentional. I wanted to create that whole atmosphere of chaos, and the like you said, the loud music and the people and the food and all of that happens in the wedding, right? And I wanted to again zoom in on what is happening to the main person within this wedding, and it kind of reflects, it was intentional because I wanted it to reflect what happens often in real life, where everybody's so obsessed with the celebrations and the decorations and the food and the clothes and the music in a wedding. But I wonder if people actually sit to think about, okay, what is happening to the couple? Like, what is the couple feeling themselves, right? Mm-hmm. And especially in a situation like this, where this woman, the heroine, she has chosen to get married, again, not out of duress, but there's a sense of obligation towards her mother. Mm-hmm. And that kind of makes her make this choice of marrying this particular person. But she has a lot of there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of confusion, there's a lot of insecurity. And so I wanted to juxtapose the chaos of the event and the chaos inside her heart, and and kind of go from there. And then you move into a quiet, still hotel room, so that changes the atmosphere. Mm-hmm. And then that something is going to happen now in the plot that's going to switch direction. So all of it was intentional.
Nuna is like a lot of characters in your stories. They really kind of wish they were somewhere else. Like characters in Toronto wish they were in Dhaka and vice versa. And it just so happens that a feeling of displacement is a big part of the Canadian literature canon. So many of our stories are about how we'd be more comfortable or better off or safer or happier somewhere else. Are you presenting us with an update to that tradition?
Yes, but perhaps not as consciously. I wrote these stories, as I was saying before, I wrote these stories because that's what I was compelled to write. That's what I was called to write, given my own lived experience, given the experiences of people around me, people that I know, my friends, my family. I continue to see the effects of immigration on our on the decisions that we make, on our emotions, our feelings, on our relationships with one another. I see it in my personal life. I see it in my work. So all of those things really were the driving forces to write these stories. It was simply a calling, and I imagine that wanting to be home or wanting to be in a better place is something that we all think about, or something that we all long for, at least at some point in our lives, right? So and I hope that connects us all as readers. So that was really the motivation. So the combination of those things were the motivation and the driving force behind writing these stories. But I'm glad to be adding to the can-lit scene.
So. Last question, at the risk of stating something horribly obvious, everybody knows, even Gus, Writing is a tough game. There's a lot of rejection, very little acceptance. The rewards are uncertain at best, but you keep at it, and you do it in Toronto, the nation's capital. And I'm just curious about what keeps you going.
Oh, my love for writing. That's really the only thing that keeps me going. Even when I started writing these stories, I didn't know if they were ever going to be published, even though that was the hope. I didn't know how well it was going to do. I still don't know how well. I mean, I know that people have read it, and I'm very grateful for the people who have come and shared their feelings about the book with me, but I really don't know how well it's going to continue, how well it's going to do in the future, or whether it should have done better. I don't know. So those are things, I mean, recognition and getting, I guess, monetary rewards for your craft and the labor that you put in for all these years is wonderful, but I try not to be attached to those things, because then I will not write, or I will be discouraged to continue writing, because like you said, there are so many rejections even after you become a published writer.
Yep.
It's not a guarantee that, unless you're extremely lucky, it's not a guarantee that it's going to, that you're going to be that established writer, at least in the beginning of your career, that will make you, or that will, enable you to write comfortably without worrying about how you're going to make a living. There's no guarantee. So that cannot be the driving factor to do creative work, for me at least. So you have to love it. You have to have that, I guess, limitless love for this thing to be able to do it, or to continue to do it despite all the rejections around you. So,
well, that concludes our little get together.